Now, where were we? Let's see. Oh yes, it's episode 57 of Segaiden.
The proposed Geneva agreements on Afghanistan that would provide for the complete withdrawal of Soviet occupation forces from that country.
When last we checked in on Sega Master System, we had rolled into 1988 with a sophisticated sequel to an SG-1000 game. And at the same time, Sega had decided to level up its marketing by ceding its destiny at American retail to the guys at Tonka. Sega would survive this strategic blunder, and eventually we'll see the company's home gaming renaissance in the Sega Genesis. First, though, we have to make it through the wilderness years leading up to the Genesis launch. I will say this for Sega. Unlike their counterparts at Nintendo, they actually supported the goofy peripherals they released to retail. I don't know that the world was necessarily clamoring for lots of light phaser and 3D glasses support, but by God, we got games that offered it. Both of them, in fact, in this episode. This is in marked contrast to Nintendo, who has, to this point, been pretty apathetic about supporting the pricey add-on console gadgets its customers bought. Spoiler alert, that would be an ongoing habit for Nintendo, who never peddled a peripheral they couldn't abandon within a matter of months. That habit began with Rob, the robot operating buddy, a charismatic piece of plastic whom we now realize existed entirely as a marketing Trojan horse to get the Nintendo Entertainment System in the door at American retail. This explains why Nintendo never actually followed up with additional games for Rob, despite selling hundreds of thousands of the thing, and in fact didn't even bother finishing one of the 2 Rob games they did ship. The Zapper Light Gun fared a little better, but only because of third-party support. Nintendo didn't ship a new first-party Zapper game between June 1986's Gumshoe and April 1990's To the Earth, a gap of nearly 4 years, despite happily peddling the Zapper and Duck Hunt as a pack-in for years. Sega, on the other hand, kept cranking them out. Rescue Mission is, by my count, the 5th light gun game to hit Master System in the US out of 8. In April 1988, that puts it 1 ahead of Nintendo's own first-party Zapper releases, of which Nintendo would only ultimately publish 6. Of course, NES fans also had third-party titles like Operation Wolf and Shooting Range to choose from, but proportionately, Sega's support is a lot more impressive. The NES would receive 17 official releases with light gun support, twice as many as Master System, sure, but the NES library ended up being 7 times as big as the Master System's. That speaks to a much greater investment in the tech on Sega's part, a more determined effort to give light phaser owners something to do with their peripheral than Nintendo demonstrated. Of course, the flip side of this is that we're about halfway through this segment on Rescue Mission for Master System and have yet to actually look at Rescue Mission for Master System. That's because Rescue Mission, like many light gun games for both NES and Master System, doesn't really give us that much to say about it. Conceptually, I'd call Rescue Mission a midway point between Gumshoe and Operation Wolf. The spirit of the action falls very much in line with the former, while the military theme and objectives have more to do with the latter. Like Gumshoe, Rescue Mission involves protecting a helpless little guy from hazards that swarm him from all directions. In this case, the little guy shows up as a military medic, pumping a handcart along a rail through the battlefield, attempting to treat and liberate wounded soldiers. It's very fortunate for all parties involved that the wounded soldiers all appear along the side of the railway. Either that or the medic has just decided not to bother treating anyone who has fallen more than an arm's reach beyond his handcart. Whatever the case, the medic travels automatically along the rail and pauses for a few seconds to treat any soldier he encounters. Rescue Mission plays entirely with the light phaser, so all you need to worry about is staving off the enemies who rush to kill him. This game is from the 1980s, but given the complete disregard for the Geneva Convention on display, you might think it was from the modern age. Nevertheless, the medic can only pump and heal. You can only shoot. You can't really interact with your on-screen ally. Well, technically you can, but I don't recommend it. Shoot the medic, and you'll leave him stunned for several seconds, rendering him even more vulnerable to enemy attack than an unarmed man riding an open rail car already is. And man, do these bad guys not give a flip about the rules of warfare. They pour in from all sides, shooting at a field medic clearly emblazoned with the Red Cross symbol, breaking all the accepted rules of international combat, much in the same way that Sega broke the rules of international trademark with the Red Cross logo. Like the IOC, the Red Cross has become super touchy about the use of its symbol these days. Sega would be in such trouble if they reissued this cart unmodified in the present day. Not that they ever would. But the more pressing threat here is the infinite array of soldiers, who approach from all directions and unleash an endless stream of projectiles at the medic. All of these weapons pose a threat, though the nature of a projectile determines the level of danger it represents. The medic will only be stunned by basic bullets and boomerangs, not to mention bomb blasts to assure the assonance of the arsenal. More threatening are weapons like grenades and bazookas, which will kill the medic in 3 hits. Worse, enemy special forces appear frequently, and their weapons are capable of a single hit kill, making them a #1 priority target. You do have a few advantages working in your favor at least. If a weapon stuns the medic, you can hasten his recovery by shooting the cartoon stars that appear above his head. One of those cute little Sega details akin to murdering the mafia ghosts in Gangster Town. Also, if you manage to heal an ally without accidentally shooting and murdering them, they'll leave behind a bonus drop that you can shoot to claim, kind of like Operation Wolf or Metal Slug. These drops will restore your health, protect you from a special force's insta-kill, or wipe out every bad guy on the screen. And brother, let me tell you, you need every single one of these power-ups because Rescue Mission is every bit as hard as you'd expect from a Sega game. Once again, we see the fallacy of the Nintendo hard meme. Nintendo had nothing but easy games for babies, like Ninja Gaiden and TMNT and Cobra Triangle. Sega was where the real existential despair comes into play. Rescue Mission gives you 3 lives and 0 continues with which to complete 5 stages of rapidly escalating difficulty. It makes Rambo for Master System seem manageable. To make things even trickier, you don't simply have lives, you actually assist a crew of 3 distinct medics. Each life is a different medic, each with their own traits, and with each fresh life you protect a different guy, Mike, Steve, or John. Each medic performs differently in action, so every life plays a little differently. Mike moves quickly but treats victims slowly, leaving him motionless on the rail for longer. Steve can heal guys pretty efficiently, but he has to rest periodically to recover from the exertion of pumping that handcart. Only John has no flaws, and everyone else sucks. Whereas this game doesn't suck, but its crazy high difficulty level seems geared toward making you feel like you suck. Don't believe it. You are a valid person. It's just Rescue Mission is super difficult. But fair is fair. Just because a Master System game relies on a peripheral doesn't necessarily mean it should be forgotten. Case in point is Maze Hunter 3D, one of the few Master System games that Sega hasn't forgotten. Like a lot of Sega-made 8-bit console games, Maze Hunter 3D doesn't quite feel like a fully realized concept. It has a lot of charm and a compelling atmosphere, but assuming you can actually survive past the first few levels, the gameplay loop never really changes from what you see in those first few stages. There are no bosses, the speed of the action never really increases, and you don't have a lot of opportunity to use one of the actions that the interface dedicates one of the controller's 2 face buttons to. And of course, it's unforgivingly difficult. And yet Maze Hunter 3D has that special Sega sauce. It has that distinct Sega vibe that reminds you why people love the company, especially in the Japanese release, which benefits from FM synthesis support. I can find no better way to describe Maze Hunter 3D than the outrun of top-down action RPG dungeon crawls. I realize that this is a deeply esoteric and narrow way to describe a game, but I stand by it. Compare this to a contemporary release like Dungeon Explorer, and hopefully you'll see what I mean. Maze Hunter 3D uses the 3D glasses in a different way than usual. Instead of attempting to create an immersive first-person or behind-the-shoulder perspective to recreate the speedy thrill of an arcade super scalar game, this adventure instead places the camera high above the action in order to create a multi-tier shoebox diorama that players effectively peer into. The 3D gimmicks you see here, perhaps for the first time in all of 3D-powered video gaming history, would resurface years later in better-known creations by Nintendo. The entire top-down running, jumping, and fighting through throngs of monsters with melee attacks and occasional temporary projectile power-ups would become a key selling point of Super Mario 3D Land, nearly 25 years later. And the idea of a fixed camera perspective in which the player's avatar can shift between planes of action at varied relative distances from the viewer would end up being a key mechanic of Virtual Boy Wario Land. Not to mention 3DS titles like Mutant Mudds and Zeodrifter. And those concepts got their start here. Probably. I mean, it's a fool's errand to ever state that some video game concept or another definitively got its start at such and such a place, but I invite you to name a game that used 3D glasses to do this before Maze Hunter 3D. That's what the comments are for, know-it-all. Maze Hunter 3D revolves around a pretty simple gameplay loop. You control a little guy through a succession of multi-tier mazes, ultimately trying to survive your way through 20 of the things. Along the way, you encounter a succession of hostile, well, monsters doesn't seem to be quite the right word. The mazes appear to be occupied by abstract, random objects that move around mindlessly. They will kill your little dude on contact, but the majority of these amorphous blobs don't appear to have a particularly murdery agenda in mind. The main danger they present is through their haphazard, seemingly random movements. Since your little guy moves pretty slowly and can only attack on cardinal axes to defend himself, despite you being able to move in 8 directions, you can get clipped by a monster that brushes past you pretty easily. It doesn't help that the inventory system seems half-baked. You can collect and auto-equip a weapon, clothing, and shoes, but there aren't very many of these items to find, and anytime you pick one up, it overwrites the others. For example, once you find the suit that allows you to survive a few collisions with an enemy, you'll want to hang on to it and avoid overwriting it with the light suit, even though that allows you to move around more quickly. It's the weapon system that seems especially ill-formed. Aside from rare temporary projectile powers that you can find by jumping into bonus balloons that drift into sight every now and then, you can only equip an iron bar to strike enemies with. To my knowledge, better melee weapons don't exist in the game, and a bar pickup spawns pretty close to your starting point anytime you die and lose your gear. So why not just make the iron bar a default item that you begin with every time you play? It's a minor nitpick, I realize, but it really does give Maze Hunter that incomplete sensation that you get from so many original creations for Master System. It's packed with great ideas and appealing vibes, it's heartily challenging, and it's desperately in need of another couple of months to flesh out the content. With a more considered weapon system, more varied stage goals beyond reach the end by collecting a key and finding the exit, and perhaps the occasional boss, Maze Hunter 3D could have been a true all-timer. Instead, it's simply really good, albeit slightly underwhelming. Although the game has that tiring tendency of Sega software to kill you outright without warning and force you to replay the opening stages of the game over and over as you slowly progress into the later levels, the pace is slow and precise enough that it almost takes on the feeling of a roguelike or dungeon crawler, which is to say, repeatedly revisiting the opening stages isn't as onerous as in the Master System's more ruthless action games. It doesn't hurt that the game's mandatory use of the 3D glasses means you can't really play for extended sessions anyway. Maze Hunter 3D is about half an hour long when played from start to finish, which is just about how long I'm able to wear the 3D glasses before getting a headache. Perhaps realizing this, the dev team, including 3D Glasses overlord Mark Cerny, offered the rare boon of a hidden, built-in stage select code that allows you to start from the beginning on any stage up to level 16 at the title screen or at game over. That means this is the rare Master System action game for which I can actually show footage of the later stages rather than getting crushed a short way into the second level or whatever. But I don't really mind the play, die, repeat loop so much for this one. Like I said before, it has vibes. It looks like a Tower of Duraga or Dungeon Explorer type game, but it has that compelling outrun quality to it that I mentioned before. The generally mellow tunes, again, play with FM sound if you can, give it a sort of ethereal quality that matches the spacey vibe of the backgrounds, the way your hero recedes into the distance as you teleport between floors of the maze. And like Outrun, it seems pretty mellow at first, but it gradually ramps up the difficulty at just the right rate to make you feel like you could do better next time. It'd be annoying to lose a life when you're closing in on a malformed blob of an enemy, only to have it pivot unpredictably and kill you. But for the most part, dying feels like the result of a mistake on your part, or of underestimating the threat represented by a new type of foe. And finally, it uses its tech to good effect, creating a different kind of 3D immersion than Outruns. But it's a compelling sensation all the same. This is the rare game where the 3D effect is a gimmick that enhances the experience, drenching the game with delicious atmosphere. Surprisingly, the Sega Challenge newsletter had nothing to say about either of these games outside of a tiny "coming soon" mention for Maze Hunter 3D in the second issue. You can understand why they'd ignore Rescue Mission, but Maze Hunter is good. Well, at least Sega would recognize its quality in hindsight. Maze Hunter 3D ended up being one of a handful of Master System games to enjoy life beyond the original console and a patchwork of virtual console downloads, appearing, 3D elements intact, on 2016's Sega 3D Classics Collection for Nintendo 3DS. To my knowledge, that makes this one of only 3 Master System games ever to have received a posthumous physical release in the US, The other two being Phantasy Star, which appeared in a miserable GBA collection and as an unlockable title in Sonic's Ultimate Genesis collection for PlayStation 3, and Golden Axe Warrior, which was one of those unlockables. That puts this in rare company. It's just too bad that Sega never followed up on this one in a meaningful way. Maze Hunter 3D contains the foundation for a great game, and a sequel could have realized that potential. But I guess it's too much to expect a long life for a fairly offbeat take on 3D gaming that required an expensive add-on peripheral to play. Next time on Segaiden, Opa Opa returns in the game that shatters his dreams of being Sega's #1 mascot once and for all. I guess that's what those tears were about.